Islam Makhachev versus JDM is 2 weeks away, and with Islam Makhachev being a minus 260 favorite, there's a lot of people that think Makhachev's just going to run through JDM, or at least the fight's going to be close. But I don't think that at all, and I actually think this fight's going to be pretty one-sided for JDM. So let's get started with the obvious. Islam Makhachev's objective in this fight is to take JDM down. JDM is clearly the better striker, and Islam Makhachev is clearly the better grappler. Go look at JDM's fight with Belal. It's a perfect masterclass on boxing. He had great head movement, great defense. It would make no sense for Islam Makhachev to go out there and try to box or kickbox with JDM. And I think from the moment the bell rings, Makhachev's going to look towards closing in the distance and getting a takedown. On the other hand, JDM's goal is to obviously stay on the feet, to keep it a striking battle. But one common misconception I think about this fight is the size difference. I hear a lot of people saying that Makhachev's just going to be way too small. You know, he's going to struggle. JDM's going to win because of the physicality. I don't really think that's the case. JDM's 5'11", Makhachev's 5'10". They're pretty much the same height. I wouldn't be surprised if these guys look pretty much exactly the same height when they face off against each other. But I do think JDM is going to be slightly larger. You know, JDM has a longer reach. He has a 73-inch reach. Islam Makhachev has a 70-inch reach. And JDM also just appears to be a more rangy, lanky guy than Makhachev. But when they're in there, it's going to look like a 170-pounder versus a 170-pounder. I don't think this is a Khamzat Chimaev versus DDP situation where there's just a clear physical difference. I think they're going to be well matched in terms of the size. So the real question in this fight is, can Islam Makhachev take JDM down? The fight starts on the feet, and if it stays on the feet, JDM wins this. And is he going to be able to hold him down? And that's why I lean so much on the side of JDM in this fight. I think Makhachev's really going to struggle. And I'm not saying he's not going to get a takedown against JDM. I'm not saying that at all. Makhachev's one of the most high-level grapplers in the sport. I would actually be surprised if he doesn't get a takedown against JDM. But I just don't think Makhachev can keep JDM on the ground. Let's take the Dustin Poirier fight, for example. Dustin Poirier is one of the best lightweights, great takedown defense, and I think he greatly improved from his Khabib fight. We saw in that Islam Makhachev fight, Dustin Poirier was able to get back up on his feet. He was able to stuff takedowns, and that's a guy who's like 5'9" and fought at featherweight. Now take a guy like JDM. He's a guy that could not make 155 if he tried to, a natural welterweight, and a guy that I honestly think is more technical everywhere than Dustin Poirier. I think JDM has better takedown defense, better scrambles, and he's also bigger. I just can't see a world where JDM's going to get dominated on the ground by Islam Makhachev. Considering what happened in that Dustin Poirier fight, it just makes no sense to me, especially because I think JDM is more skilled everywhere than Poirier. I think he's a better fighter. What happens when JDM can defend takedowns more effectively than Poirier and be more dangerous on the feet than Poirier? And I know a lot of people bring up old fights of JDM where he was getting taken down and held down and controlled, but looking at his most recent fight against Belal, you can tell that he made vast improvements. And I'm not saying if he can defend against Belal, he can defend against Makhachev. I think it is easier to defend takedowns from Belal Muhammad. But one thing JDM did show in that fight is his style is going to be extremely difficult to get takedowns against. In that fight against Belal, we saw JDM was fighting in a crouched boxing stance, and a lot of the times Belal was trying to go for a takedown, JDM would just dip his head down and defend with his head. And I think going into this fight, the way Islam Makhachev is going to have to take down JDM is through his trips. And that's one thing Belal Muhammad didn't really have to offer, is the level of trips that Islam Makhachev possesses. But I think where Islam Makhachev is the most dangerous is his submission threat. And that's the way I think Islam Makhachev would win this fight. And I think there is a chance he could pull off a submission. If Makhachev secures a takedown, JDM's going to scramble immediately and try to get to his feet. And I think that does leave him open to a submission. Now, I don't think it's a super high probability that JDM gets caught with a Darce choke or something, but I do think there is a risk there. And even though I'm picking JDM to win this fight, if Makhachev wins this fight, I think the way he does it is by a submission. Which brings me to the final point is, I don't think Makhachev could win a decision against JDM. I think a big overlooked thing about Makhachev's game is that his cardio, he has good cardio, but it's not extremely exceptional. We've seen him in a handful of moments get tired and outpaced in championship rounds. We saw with the first Volk fight, Islam Makhachev, he ended that fight off losing. And that's a big reason why a lot of people, were arguing that Volk could have won that. And it was mainly just because Volk looked better at the end. Same thing with Dustin Poirier. Both of them were exhausted. And there were times where Dustin Poirier, he looked like he was outpacing Makhachev. I think Makhachev's more of an explosive type fighter. And I think towards the later rounds, it heavily favors JDM. A big thing about this is, will Makhachev perform better with all this extra weight? Going up 15 pounds. I don't think that's going to help his cardio out at all. And if he engages in these scrambles with JDM constantly, which I think will happen, if Makhachev gets a takedown stuffed, what's he going to do? Stay on the feet with JDM? I think that's a horrible idea. So he's going to have to go for takedowns after takedowns, even if he's getting them stuffed. And I think that's one of the most tiring things a fighter can go through. And if JDM does as well as I think he does with stuffing the takedowns, that's going to be brutal for Makhachev's gas tank. But let's talk about the striking, because I think there are some people out there that think Islam Makhachev can beat JDM on the feet, which I think is absolutely not the case. And I'm not saying Islam Makhachev's not a great striker. I think he's really solid, especially in the kickboxing. Where I think they separate in terms of striking skill level is just pure boxing. I think that's one of Islam Makhachev's biggest weaknesses. And on the feet, I think JDM's going to exploit that all day. Especially the fact that Makhachev, in my opinion, I don't think he does as well with fighters that are rangier than him. The most recent example against Moicano, and I think a big issue going into the early minutes of that fight, was that Islam Makhachev really had a big range disadvantage. Moicano just seemed longer and wider than Makhachev, and I think the range is going to be hard for him to close the distance, and I think that's also going to affect his takedown success. And I think the real reason why Makhachev won't even try to go on the feet and why it just wouldn't work out for him is the style of striker Makhachev is. If you look at the Belal Muhammad fight, Belal Muhammad was having success landing on JDM, and that's because Belal Muhammad had the threat of the takedown and was applying pressure to JDM in the striking and the wrestling. The way I think Islam Makhachev fights, he's much more defensive than Belal. He's a very safe fighter, and a lot of people might think that's an advantage, but I don't. And the reason I think so is if Makhachev doesn't make it look ugly and mixing his takedowns and striking, as long as that fight stays on the feet, JDM is going to be where he is most comfortable. And I think it's fighting on the front foot. Where JDM is the weakest, as pretty much every fighter is when they're getting pushed back. But this is the way I see the fight going. I think in the first round, both these fighters are going to start off feeling each other out for a little bit. I don't think Islam Makhachev's the type of guy like Hamza to just run in and bum rush for a takedown. I think Islam Makhachev's going to try to feel JDM out and set up a takedown through his striking. And I think in the first probably 30 seconds, Makhachev's going to try to fake a punch and engage in the grappling and try to get a takedown. And that's the big question of this fight. If Makhachev can secure a takedown early in the fight and have success holding JDM down for, a couple minutes or the entire round, that's going to set the tone for the fight, and that could decide, how this fight goes. Personally, I think JDM will give a good scramble. I think he will defend the takedown. And I think this fight is going to stay on the feet. In the first round, it's going to be a clear JDM win. I think he's going to outstrike Makhachev. And I don't think Makhachev's going to have success getting a takedown. I think if he does, it's going to be very brief. It's not going to be a full takedown where JDM's on his back. I think it's going to be very scrambly if it does happen. And I think that's kind of going to be the story for almost all of this fight. I think JDM's going to be outstriking Makhachev on the feet. Makhachev's going to be trying to exchange in the grappling as much as he can get. There's going to be a lot of clinching, and I think that's going to wear Makhachev out. Makhachev's great in the clinch, but we've seen before when he was clinching against Dustin Poirier was ripping body shots to Makhachev. I can see JDM doing that to Makhachev and actually doing serious damage to Makhachev. I don't think this is going to be a JDM domination in the first or second round, but I think JDM will end up getting a finish, and I think it's going to come late, probably in the fourth or fifth round. I think JDM will wear Makhachev out enough to where he can drop Makhachev with a body shot, or he can TKO Makhachev when it gets really sloppy and they're boxing each other in the clinch. And I think JDM will be able to pull off the finish. I think the way Makhachev can win this, and I think it's the only way he wins this, is if he gets a submission. And if he does, it'll probably be in the first or second round when they're both dry. And if he does that, that would be genuinely the most impressive thing of all time. Makhachev would be instant GOAT status. I just don't think he can pull it off. JDM's training with Craig Jones. He trained with Volk. I think he's really prepared for all of these positions he's going to get put in by Makhachev, or at least Makhachev's going to try to put him in. And I just don't see him getting it. And that's really the only way I can see Makhachev winning, because I don't trust Makhachev to perform in the late rounds. I genuinely don't, especially when he's bulked up 15 pounds. He's fighting a guy bigger than him, who's a natural 170 pounder, who's not putting on extra weight. I think the only way Makhachev could win this is an early submission, which I think there's just a very low chance of. And I wouldn't be surprised if Makhachev doesn't win one round, because I don't think Makhachev's going to be able to control JDM for a majority of the round. I don't think he's going to out damage JDM on the feet. So my final prediction for this fight is I think JDM's going to get a round 5 TKO. Let me know what you guys think about this. Do you think Makhachev can beat JDM 5 rounds? Do you think he can outstrike JDM? Do you think he can even keep it close on the feet with JDM? Let me know what you guys think about this in the comments below. If you guys like this video, make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next one.